If you're a fanatic of the unknown, unfamiliar, and enjoy creepy tales in story format, then welcome to Gravesend. That's all we do here. We upload 1 to 2 times weekly, so don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button at the bottom and ring that bell for all notifications. Now on with our story. Most stories you hear are typically about people. This one, however, is a little different. This is a story about a house that was once a loving home and the actions that turned the house into something else entirely different. This house turned into something evil. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? In 1916, Bill and Layla purchased a beautiful home to raise their 5 children. It wasn't a big house, but it was large enough for the family to live, and they had a big backyard for the children to play. After purchasing the home, Layla and Bill decided to build on an addition to the house for their oldest daughter, so she would have her own room. Everything went smooth, and after just a month of work, the addition was finished. The entire family fell in love with their new home, and the kids would spend every day playing in the backyard. Around 16 months after moving into their new house, America found itself entering into World War I. It was at this time when Bill was drafted to help fight the war. This was devastating for the family, not knowing if Bill was going to be okay or ever make it back home. After Bill was deployed, Layla did her best to keep the children under control and out of trouble. Constantly worried about her husband, she would write him on a weekly basis, hoping he would get her letters and reply. To help keep her mind off the stress of Bill being deployed and to make a little extra money, Layla started baking pies and selling them to a small diner in town. After doing this for a few months, one day as Layla was heading to town, she heard screaming coming from a house. It sounded like an intense fight was underway. Not wanting to be nosy, she continued walking until she heard a woman scream for help. Layla turned towards the screen and watched as a man hit a woman in the head with a hammer. As the hammer struck the woman, her body just collapsed, and she then fell down the steps leading to the front porch. Layla gasped and dropped the pie she was carrying. This caused the man to look up at her with rage filled in his eyes. Layla instantly realized it was Judge Brown. He was the one wielding the hammer. She couldn't believe what her eyes had just seen. But now Judge Brown was coming after her. Layla, in total disbelief of what she had just witnessed, began to run. But after a few minutes, she became winded, and she turned to see if she could see the judge following her, but he was nowhere in sight. Layla finally made it home, and she knew the judge had clearly seen her. She knew he would be coming for her very soon. He murdered that lady in cold blood. She knew she wouldn't be spared. Her mind was racing. She didn't know what to do. Should she go to the police? Should she take the children and hide? What should she do? The kids were running around, just being kids, playing and making lots of noise. Layla told them to quieten down. She needed to go back out and told her oldest daughter to get them all ready for bed. Layla had decided to go to the police and report what she witnessed. She was putting on her wrap and getting ready to head out when someone started knocking on the door. Layla's heart started pounding in terror. She feared it was the judge standing on the other side of that door. Her happy life with her wonderful husband and beautiful children could all be over in a flash. Layla softly told the kids to be quiet and tiptoed to the window to look out. She broke out in a cold sweat as she reached to pull the window covering back. Her worst nightmare was staring back at her as she peered through the window. It was Judge Brown holding the hammer, staring back at her with big, dark, almost black eyes and an evil grin. Layla screamed as the judge kicked in the door. The kids heard all the commotion and ran out of their rooms to see what was going on. Layla tried to run, but Judge Brown grabbed her and began hitting her over the head with the hammer. The children were horrified at what they were seeing, screaming and crying for the judge to stop, but he wouldn't. The oldest daughter screamed at the others and told them to hide. They all ran, but it was too late. The judge is now just standing there, looking down at Layla's lifeless body as he begins to laugh and sets his sights on the children. Can you imagine the fear the children must have felt? The heartbreak of seeing their mother murdered and now hearing his footsteps coming toward them. One by one, the judge found each child, and each one suffered the same fate as their mother. Once this horrible deed was done, the judge dropped the hammer and moved each child's body to the room where their mother lay. He positioned their bodies around their mother, then calmly walked out, expressing no guilt, shame, or remorse of what he had just done. It was well after dark now, and the judge walked home in his blood-stained clothes, collected his wife, and took her body back to Layla's house. Layla didn't know at the time, but it was his wife she saw the judge murder. When the judge returned home, he cleaned himself up, burnt the clothes he had on, and called the sheriff. He told the sheriff his wife wasn't home, he couldn't find her, and had no idea where she was. The sheriff instantly began asking around town and assumed maybe she ran out on him, or perhaps ran off with another man. This was uncommon back in those days, but it did happen. He finally made it to Layla's door. As the sheriff began to knock, he noticed the door was damaged, which raised some concern. He knocked again, but didn't hear anything inside. He thought this was a little strange, especially with 5 noisy kids. He waited a few seconds, then called out for Layla. There was no answer, so the sheriff slowly pushed the door open. He was shocked at what he saw. This scene was like no other, nothing he had ever seen before, and hoped he never saw again. Once the news broke around town, everyone was in shock. The judge acted shocked and upset, fooling everyone. After a very short investigation, it was thought a drifter may have come into town and murdered the family and the judge's wife. At this point, the war was coming to an end, and Bill had no idea what had happened to his family. Once he returned home, he couldn't find Layla or his kids anywhere. After yelling and looking around the property, he noticed a man walking up the road. Bill asked if he knew where his wife Layla or the kids were, and the man told him what had happened a few months prior. Bill was in disbelief and started to curse at the man for telling him such an awful lie. The man told Bill he was very sorry, but promised him he was telling the truth. Bill, still not believing what the man told him, headed to town to speak with the sheriff. Once the sheriff told Bill what had happened, Bill was in shock. He fell to his knees, screaming and crying. His life was destroyed. He couldn't get his mind off losing his family and all the horrible things he witnessed during the war. Bill began to drink heavily and became bitter towards the world. Bill desperately needed and longed to see or speak to his wife again. He couldn't go on this way. He missed his family so much. His mind had no peace. Bill just wanted to die and be with his family. One day, Bill ran into a young man who claimed to be an empath. He said he could communicate with the dead. Bill became fascinated with this gift and decided he would hold a seance on his own. One night, after many tries, Bill heard someone repeating something to him during a seance. He couldn't make out what the voice was saying at first, but as he strained his ear to hear, he heard a voice chanting, "Revenge." Once he understood what was being said, he was hit with a flurry of images. Whatever was communicating with Bill was showing him what happened to his wife and his children. Bill watched in horror as the judge barged in and took his family away from him. Once he came out of this trance-like state and regained his composure, he was in tears, but he still heard a voice chanting, "Revenge." Fueled by anger and alcohol, Bill grabbed his rifle and headed to the judge's house. Once there, he kicked in the door and aimed his weapon at the judge. Bill screamed he knew what the judge had done. Caught off guard, the judge acted as if he didn't know what Bill was talking about. Bill said it never made sense that your wife was at my house. Layla didn't know her before I left. The judge knew he had been caught by Bill, but still tried to play it off as if he didn't understand what was going on. The judge, denying his involvement, didn't help him this time. Bill knew what happened. Bill slammed his rifle in the judge's back and commanded him to walk. Bill forced the judge back to his house and made him go downstairs to the basement. Bill then hit the judge with the butt of his rifle and knocked him unconscious. Bill then tied the judge up across a wooden workbench and began to hold another seance. Midway through the seance, the judge woke up and quickly realized he was restrained. Bill noticed the judge was awake. He walked over and just stood over him. Bill looked the judge dead in his eyes and told him he bought the house for him and his family, and now, because of him, it was empty. He told the judge, "You did this. You took my family away from me." As Bill was talking, another voice was echoing in the darkness. It sounded like it was coming from behind Bill. It was chanting revenge over and over. Bill kneeled back down and continued his seance as more voices started to come through the darkness. The judge was terrified at what was taking place. There was no explanation for all the voices. The judge then noticed Bill was in a trance-like state and thought this may be his opportunity to escape. The judge started trying to free himself from the rope. Just as the judge freed his hand, something grabbed him and pushed him back down and continued holding him with a lot of pressure. He could see it wasn't Bill, but whatever this was, he couldn't see and he couldn't move. Bill began seeing more images. He started to realize what he was being shown. His family was unable to move on. They were stuck in the house. Stuck in the house where they were brutally murdered. Now the thought of his family being stuck in that house for eternity and not being able to move on to their heavenly home angered Bill. Bill just couldn't bear the thought of his family having to relive their nightmare over and over again. Bill struck a deal with whatever was showing him the images. It told Bill to bring in 6 more souls to take the place of his wife and each of his 5 children who were trapped. A soul for a soul was the only way to free his family. The judge heard the deal that Bill made with this dark force, and he started to beg and plead with Bill, but there was no use. Eye for an eye, soul for a soul, Bill yelled out as he stabbed the judge in the heart, and as soon as the judge drew his last breath, Bill saw a bright flash of light and knew one of his children moved into the light. Bill then went into town and gathered 5 more people, all of which who had done him wrong in the past. One was the sheriff, who failed to get to the bottom of what happened with his family. After Bill freed his loved ones from the home, he was unsure of what to do next, so he just continued to live in the house and drank himself to sleep every night. One night, Bill was extremely intoxicated when he heard someone calling his name from the basement. Bill walked to the stairway and looked down, screaming for whoever was in the house to get out. No one answered. It was at that moment when Bill started to head down the steps when he felt someone push him from behind, and he fell down the staircase. Once he hit the bottom, he was shocked that he wasn't in any pain. He looked to the top of the steps to see who pushed him and noticed the judge standing there smiling back at him. Confused, Bill just watched as a bright light glistened and the judge disappeared. Bill ran up the steps and there was no sign of the judge anywhere. He heard something downstairs behind him, and as he turned, he saw himself still lying at the bottom of the steps. Looking down at his body, he understood that he now belonged to the house. He was trapped, along with the sheriff and all the others he had murdered, and the only way to free himself was to replace his soul with someone else's. We hope you liked today's story. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, or you too may wake up at Soul House.